So part one last week, we were talking about 12 different species that I had in my nest boxes. My smaller nest boxes were the chickadees and the bluebird nest boxes. This week, I'm going to be talking about the 6 species that I've had in my larger wood duck, my large nest boxes. But Serena gave me a good introduction, but I'll review what I showed last week is I'm an IBM retiree. I build, maintain, monitor nest boxes on trails, most of which I established. That's a picture of me and my truck. My only use of my truck is to lug all my stuff around. I'm a member of the Audubon Society. I participate in the Cavity Nesters Recovery Program. I'm a member of NABS. I've received an award in 2012 for my bluebird efforts. And I work with the Wildlife Center in Silicon Valley to renest and wild foster rescued barn owls and or release them. Now, shockingly, I'm not a birder. So what I tell people is I raise birds for birders to watch. I'm familiar with what I have in my nest boxes and some of the more common species. I have no formal education. I found out some years ago that I was a citizen scientist. If we look at just one of these items in the list here, what is a cavity nester and what is a recovery program? This is a tremendous graphic that shows where the various birds nest, but the birds that I'm dealing with are cavity nesters. So these are a couple of pictures of natural cavities. My wife, Jana, is terrific at finding cavities with birds in them. And on the left, we have a barn owl in a sycamore tree. On the right, we have 2 barn owls in a large palm tree. And unfortunately, nesting in palm trees is all too common. This is a big palm tree, but I'm thinking primarily of the smaller palm trees. Here we have a northern flicker, 2 pictures of northern flickers, both different types of cavities. So the Cavity Nester Recovery Program was established to help the cavity nesters. Their numbers were declining. The program has been very, very successful. One thing we can do to help them is to put up a nest box. A nest box is really an artificial cavity. So in California, the California Recovery Program has hundreds of volunteers, and it's been very, very successful. They've fledged over 350,000 birds since the founding in 1995. This is a picture showing the kind of nest boxes that I build. And the boxes that we're going to be talking about today is this one here on the left, which is either a screech owl or a kestrel box. Depending on where you put it, you could get either of those species. This is a barn owl box, and this is a wood duck box. Notice the entrance holes. The entrance holes are just large enough for those particular species to get in. On the right is the same boxes, but I have side opening doors on 2 of the boxes. This box and that box, and the barn owl has a door on the top and a clean out door on the one end. Now, if you notice, there's wood shavings, there's aspen wood shavings in the boxes. And the reason that I do that is because these birds do not bring nesting material into the box. So we put wood shavings in the box to protect the eggs. In the case of the barn owl box, some people say that, well, the barn owl makes its own nesting material. And what that would be is as they cough up the pellets, the hen will chew up the pellets, break them down, and form nesting material. But if you clean out this box, it has a bare floor, and imagine how many pellets it will take before she has a layer of nesting material in the box to keep the eggs from rolling around. So the aspen wood shavings in the barn owl box actually serve 2 purposes. One is to keep the eggs from rolling around, and secondly, it makes the box easier to clean out.
And Lee, in the slide before this, you mentioned palm trees, and Barbara wanted to know why is it unfortunate to nest in palm trees?
Palm trees are probably the greatest source of owlets needing to be rescued. It really isn't a cavity. They're nesting in there on the branches of the palm tree. And in cases where we get in new rescued owlets, I ask, well, do you have the address where it came from? And sometimes they do. I look that address up, and lo and behold, in front of the house is a palm tree. And right across the street is open grassland like you see in here. Open grassland is ideal habitat for barn owls, not only barn owls, but kestrels also. So the barn owls hunt in the open grassland, but they roost and nest in the palm trees, unfortunately. So this graphic here, if we're talking about large boxes, the immediate thing you'll notice in this photo is that there's three nest boxes here. There's a barn owl nest box here. Way over here is a kestrel box, and way up here on the hill is another kestrel box. Now these birds are territorial. You can put two barn owl boxes about 80 yards apart minimum, and they're okay with each other. Barn owls are territorial around their box, but they can have overlapping hunting areas. The kestrels are territorial, so you need to keep them spaced. In this case, it's probably more than 2/10 of a mile in between. I've had kestrel boxes that are 0.2 miles apart and they have kestrels in them. But the American Kestrel Partnership Program would tell you that they should be about a half mile apart. Well, it really boils down to the availability of prey. If the prey supply is good, then they can hunt closer to the nest box. There's no need to defend a larger area. If the prey base is down, then they have to hunt farther. And I read that barn owls might hunt up to 3 miles in those situations. So what I want to impress you with here is the distances between the boxes. I'll get more into detail about that later on. So we need to review some statistics. This is a characteristic table, and what it shows is for those 6 species that I'm going to be talking about. This is the species name, but over here we have the alpha code. So I use in my graphs the alpha code. Instead of typing out American kestrel, I can just say AMKE, and it's not really hard to determine what the alpha code might be, first 2 letters of each of these words. So it's easier to refer by an alpha code than to spell the name out, but as everything, it's not that simple because there's variations in the alpha code. The bander has their own 4-character alpha code, and there's also a 5-character alpha code. But what this chart shows here, this table shows, is the American kestrel can have 1 to 2 broods. Broods typically are 4 to 5 eggs. The female lays eggs on a 1 to 3 day schedule, typically every other day. Incubation period, 26 to 32 days. Nesting period, 28 to 31 days. The nesting period is how many days before they fledge. So you don't need to memorize all this right now. We'll talk more about it later. So for all of my years that I've been working with these birds, this chart shows how successful I've been. The American kestrel, for example, I've had 117 broods, and I started working with kestrels back in 2010. How many eggs did I had? I've had 530 eggs, 427 have hatched, 374 have fledged. And this little red diamond up here, what that means, if you're an American kestrel, you're an egg in a nest box, what are your chances of fledging? Well, you have a little bit above a 70% chance of fledging. Barn owls aren't that good. We're down here with more than 50%. But barn owls, admittedly, my data that I collect on barn owls is the poorest quality of all of the species that I work with. And I'll expand upon that later. The starling, I've had 11 broods, 48 eggs, but none hatch and none fledge because that's a non-native species. I never fledge any starlings. Northern flicker, I've had 11 broods, 30 eggs, 10 have hatched, and just 7 have fledged. Western screech owl, 21 broods, 59 eggs, 55 hatched, 54 fledged. Actually, a really, really good statistic. Wood ducks, 42 broods, 402 eggs, 272 hatched, and 261 fledged. This chart shows the nesting, the breeding season for 2020 for these particular species. And the solid colors show number of eggs on a particular day. Here's the dates along the bottom. And if you look at any particular day, the height of the solid color is how many eggs I had on that day. So if the dark green is barn owl eggs. So barn owls kicked the season off back on February 18th. I found my first barn owl egg. The green hatching is here. The green hatched coloring is when we have owlets. So we can see here that we had barn owl eggs. We had nestlings, owlets way back here, and then we have another spurt. So another clutch came in late in the season, and the season continues. Barn owls, it's about 9 weeks before they fledge. American kestrels, similarly, they come along, and this year I had 2 clutches, or a second clutch of American kestrels, which has for me been kind of unusual, but I appreciate it. And then the same thing with wood ducks. I had wood ducks here, eggs, and then I can't really qualify it as a second clutch of eggs. Second clutch is defined as the same species in the same box within 2 weeks of fledging. This was a different box, so I can't really say it's a second clutch, but it was a late clutch. And anyway, it shows the season when I had the most eggs, the most nestlings in a box was around late April, early May. So then we get into photos and videos finally, but before I show you some videos, I want to tell you how I got the videos and the pictures that I'm going to be showing you. What I have here is a GoPro camera that has an LED light, a light panel, mounted on an offset camera mount. The LED light is powered by a battery pack, and underneath here is a paint roller handle. So all of this screws onto an extendable pole, a painter's pole, and I can stick this into the box to record video. So with the GoPro, GoPro has fantastic quality video. It also gives you the ability to connect to your phone. You can actually see on your smartphone what the camera is seeing. This universal joint allows me to swing it left and right, up and down, so I can check in corners if I need to. 12-volt battery pack powers the LED light. This is probably the 5th variation of a camera system that I came up with. And I credit its success largely to this LED panel. Until I had this LED panel, I couldn't get enough light into the box. You don't really need a GoPro camera. You could use a small camera, something like a pocket camera. It has to be small enough. This will actually fit into a kestrel nest box, which has a 3-inch entrance hole. So again, that's the camera system that I'm using. So we get into northern flickers. Northern flickers are kind of good and bad. Because they are a woodpecker, they really modify some of my nest boxes. And they can have one brood, 5 to 8 eggs typically. The female lays 1 egg a day. 11 to 13 days incubation, 24 to 27 days before they fledge. So here's one of those rascals in one of my kestrel boxes. And I call them rascals because in this particular box here, I actually had a northern flicker gnaw a hole through the bottom of the box. And I had to put a new bottom on it. It would be difficult to lay eggs and have them protected in a box with a hole in the bottom. The box, I have a sun shield on top to kind of break the heat in the noon sun. Ventilation grids on the side of the box. And it's also a front opening box, which I like. This is the inside of a kestrel box in which northern flickers have nested. And I mentioned that I put wood shavings in the boxes for the kestrels. And the first thing the flicker does is it removes most of the shavings. And you can see on the inside of the box here, they've been hammering away. You can actually build a northern flicker box, and I've done that. We had one of our parks that I'm in has a lot of kestrels in it. And I built a beautiful kestrel box, a northern flicker box out of redwood, mounted it in a tree. And the thing you do with the box is you fill it with wood shavings. So from the bottom of the box all the way up to the hole, you pack it with wood shavings. And what's supposed to happen is the flicker is supposed to come into the box. They are a softwood excavator. They come into the box and they think they're doing a lot of work by removing all of the shavings. And this particular box, instead of the flicker going into the box and removing the shavings, it bore a hole through the side of the box. So I took that box down. I had a second box, and yes, the flicker bored down, created the tunnel down into the shavings, but nothing ever developed. So I have a number of boxes where I see all of the shavings have been removed, but usually no eggs. In this case, they actually laid 4 eggs. So I hope you were able to enjoy that. That's 2 northern flicker nestlings. And I was curious about the sound that they were making. So I sent it off to Robin Bailey and Nestwatch, and Robin Bailey posted it on their Facebook page. And it turns out that if you get enough of these nestlings in the box, it could sound like a beehive. So the thinking is that they're making sounds like bees to scare predators away. I only have 2 here, but imagine if there was 4 or 5, 6 nestlings, it would really be a continuous sound. So I'm not very good at estimating age, but I would say that these are less than a week old. Now I'm going to show you another video where they're a little bit older. So it's a similar sound, but what's rather interesting here is they appear to be clinging to the side of the box. And I looked that up, and what I read is when they're about 17 days old, they start clinging to the side of the box. Now I'll show you one more video. So when they get this old, I stop sticking the camera in. Sometimes they get rather uneasy and they may injure themselves. So
really quickly, Barbara asked, does the LED light affect the behavior of the birds?
No, it doesn't. What I try to do is I put a piece of acrylic over the lights that I have sanded with sandpaper. So I'm trying to diffuse the light, and then I also point it up so it's not pointing right at the birds, but I have indirect light. And like you and I, their eyes will adjust to the light. I've never noticed any effect by sticking my camera in and using that technique. Okay, we move on to the Western screech owl then. So one brood, 2 to 7 eggs. The most I ever had, I believe, was 5. The female lays eggs in a 1 to 3 day schedule, typically 2 to 3 days. Incubation period, 21 to 30 days, and they fledge around 28 days. So this is an interesting picture right here. This particular box is a wood duck box, and I thought that I might be getting starlings in the box. So I set an in-box trap and came back the next day and found the trap had been set off, opened the box up, and here was a screech owl sitting in there. So the screech owl never woke up. I reached into the box, took the in-box trap down, and by the time I was ready to close the door, the owl was leaning over. The door was going to hit it, so I took my finger and I pushed it back into the box and closed the door, and it never woke up. They're very sound sleepers. Now, you can't tell if this is a male or a female. They look identical, and I'm told the only way to tell the difference is to weigh them, and the female weighs slightly more than the male, a couple of grams. So using my camera system, I'm often looking down, and when you look down, you don't always get to see something. It would be nice if the hen here would get up and show me her eggs, but she doesn't. She sleeps right through it. Screech owls are probably the most undisturbed of any of these species that I work with. So I finally see an egg sticking out here, and I don't really know how many eggs she has. And I may not know how many eggs she has until I see this. So here we have the female with a couple of owlets, maybe 3. And the female stays with the owlets for about the first 3 weeks. And then she goes off with longer and longer breaks. Eventually I will not find her in the box, but you notice all these feathers here. These feathers are other species of birds. And I took some of the feathers out, and to me, they look like they were maybe Western scrub jays or the California towhees. So sometimes I see mice laying down in the bottom of the box. At this point in time, it's the male that's feeding her. The male has been feeding her since she started incubating the eggs, and until she finally leaves the box, she feeds herself. If you, again, this is a wood duck box, and one thing I want to point out before I forget it is notice this hardware cloth here. So with it, the box being a wood duck box, you don't want a smooth surface here up to the entrance hole. If the surface is too smooth, the ducklings cannot get out of the box. So the hardware cloth forms really a ladder for the ducklings to get out. So the screech owls are perhaps, even though it looks a mess, perhaps the cleanest. I don't feel that I have to even clean the nest out because there isn't droppings all over the box. It doesn't really become gross. It'll look like this next year, even, you know, with another clutch that has fledged from there. So they're again, they're the most undisturbed by my camera of any of these species. Now what you see here, red, could be part of a crayfish. So note that the female has now left the box. I'm expecting these to be about 3 weeks old. This is a video that I created by setting up a motion activated camera outside the box. I finally wanted to catch some screech owls. And they're small owls, they're only about 9 inches tall. But what's happened is the one in the entrance hole probably hasn't fledged yet, where the one on top of the box has, and the other owl that was there was probably one of the adults feeding the juvenile. So again, this is a wood duck box. And I don't believe that they prefer wood duck boxes, it's just they prefer the location where the wood duck box is.
And Lee, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So, Erica asked, will screech owls nest in the suburbs if open space is nearby?
The only place I get them is along creeks. So I think what they like along the creeks is the open woodland. These are open woodlands along the creeks, a lot of blue oaks, valley oaks, coast live oak. That's the only place I get them. Of course, that's the only place I've tried to get them.
And then when you were showing the video of the chicks in the nest box, Zane asked, where is the mother?
Well, the mother has left the box, and she is now, she may come back to the box just like the male to feed the owlets. I said that the female stays with the owlets until they're about 3 weeks old, and then she takes longer breaks out of the box. So gradually she's not there. Both of the adults are feeding the owlets. And that'll be true in barn owls. So in a little while we'll get into barn owls. So here we have the American kestrel. We have the male here and the female. Beautiful birds. They're the smallest falcon in North America. 1 to 2 broods, 4 to 5 eggs. Female lays on a 1 to 3 day schedule, every other day being normal. Incubation period 26 to 32 days, a nesting period 28 to 31 days. So this is a typical clutch of kestrel eggs. 5 eggs, it arranged in a beautiful circle. But in addition to the eggs in the box, what we have is pellets. So the kestrels cough up pellets. And notice how my shavings has provided the nesting material. The first indication that I see of kestrels being in the box is I see an indentation in the wood shavings. So on the left, we have a male kestrel incubating eggs and a female kestrel on the right incubating eggs. The male, I read, incubates about 40% of the time. The female would be the other 60% of the time. And once incubation starts, I never see someone out of the box. Either one is always incubating the eggs. So the calling you heard is the adult outside of the box, somewhat concerned about me being at the box. And all of these little sweeties here, these chicks, I would just like to pick them up and give each one of them a big kiss, but I don't. So they're probably, I'm guessing, around a week old. So here you can see chicks. I think they're about 2 weeks old. But what you'll see is you still see pellets here. But notice how the walls have these white streaks on it. What the chicks do is they shoot their excrement up onto the walls. And that might be an effort to keep the nest dry. But in fact, when it's time to clean out the nest has a coating of this stuff. It's actually a crust on the top of the nest. So the chicks aren't particularly upset about me peeking in at the moment. I don't mean to make bumps like that. It sounds a lot louder than it should be. But here you see chicks that are about 3 weeks old, and they are assuming defensive positions. sometimes, rarely, they might even flip over on the back with claws up. So after 3 weeks, I don't check. I don't come back to boxes until after I expect them to have fledged. So all of this data here, all of this information about when I check boxes is kind of dependent upon if I'm able to determine when the first egg was laid. So if I know when the first egg is laid, I can take certain actions. How frequently do I want to check the box? For example, we looked at 5 kestrel eggs, and that's a normal size clutch. So if I see 5 eggs and I see incubation has started, well, why don't I come back in 30 days instead of bothering them every week? So I come back in 30 days expecting the eggs to be hatched. And again, here, I could check weekly once the eggs have hatched, but after 3 weeks, I stopped checking. So estimating these dates is kind of important to me anyway. So we're moving on to wood ducks here. And if I was into makeup, I would want to look like this guy. He's just fantastic. And the female is on the left here. So they can have 1 to 2 broods, lay up to 16 eggs, lay an egg every day. The female can lay her own weight while she completes her clutch. Incubation period, 28 to 37 days. Nesting period, just one day. And that's because, well, I'll get into that a little bit later. But here we have a date range of 56 to 70 days, and that really is the period before they can actually take flight. So on the left here, I see a male wood duck standing on top of a wood duck box. And what the male does is he locates a cavity and stands on it, stands near it to show the female. She comes over and checks it out. Now, this particular wood duck box here is mounted again along a creek. It's mounted on an oak tree. And notice this portal here. So what I can do with this portal is it has 2 screws, one here and one here. I can rotate that 180 degrees and basically close the box. I have problems with tree squirrels, and in order to keep the tree squirrels out of the box, I close the boxes during the off season. So all of my boxes right now have this reversed. The box is closed until I open it up again in the spring. So this is the creek that I was talking about, where I get a lot of wood ducks. And there's one other creek where I also get wood ducks, but it'll look similarly. Nice small creek with open woodland, oak trees along it. And the box is actually up here. So this is the box. All of my boxes, all of my wood duck boxes, I can walk up and touch. And I have them right next to water. So the ducklings, once they fledge, once they leave the box, the hen will lead them down to water. And I'll expand on that in a little bit. So when I'm peeking into nest boxes, I mentioned that we put aspen wood shavings in the boxes. The first indication that someone has been in the box is I might see a depression in the box. Someone has been in there and is checking it out. What they have to do is they have to check the depth of the shavings, because the wood duck buries her eggs initially in the shavings. The next thing I might see is, gee, there's a mound in the shavings. So that's an indication that something has been buried. I'll open up the box and get an egg count, uncover the eggs, get an egg count, and then cover them up again. So this can go on for a while, and then, but eventually what the female does is, as she nears the completion of her clutch, she will start pulling feathers out of her breast and mix those with shavings to form a blanket that she covers the eggs with. So in this case here, I found a big blanket. I uncovered all the eggs to get an egg count, and then I covered all the eggs up again with a blanket and closed it. Now, the nest on the left here looks completely different than this nest. This is basically what's called a dump nest. Now, what has happened is multiple females have been in the box, dropped eggs, and nobody is going to incubate them. So all of these eggs here were not hatched. Nobody was incubating them. It's a dump nest. And again, it's multiple females coming into the box for whatever reason. Some people think it might be, well, they want their genetics to be passed on. Let this other female hatch my eggs. Now here I find a female, bless her little heart, incubating her eggs. And once she starts incubation, she may leave the box 2-3 times a day to feed herself, but then she's back in the box incubating eggs. If I see this, I don't come back again until I expect the eggs to have hatched and the ducklings to have fledged. I don't want to disturb her all that while. Incubation is about 30 days. So over here, we have just a brief video of a hen with ducklings. See if I can play it here. I guess I can't play it with a laser. Anyway, we have ducklings here. The significance of this is that the eggs have hatched. You look at these ducklings here and they might be a day old. They're fully feathered, they're ready to go. Within 24 hours, typically, the female will be on the ground outside the box. She will have a calling out. So she will be outside the box, call the ducklings out. They have to scamper up out of the box and then sort of semi-fly down to the ground. All of my boxes, I says, are close to the ground. The duckling doesn't have very far to go and it's right next to water. The hen has to lead the ducklings to water and to show them what is food, and they immediately begin self-foraging. So it's a miracle, I think, that they can be ready to go in 24 hours. Now, sometimes you read wood duck boxes, gee, you want them 20 feet up in the air. No, I don't want my boxes 20 feet up in the air. And they will say that you shouldn't have them any farther than 50 yards from water. Well, no, I want my boxes right next to the water. So once the ducklings are out of the box, the female has a tremendous task of keeping them together, keeping them safe until they can fly. So, yes.
Rick, Becky asked, do you use gloves to uncover the eggs?
No. Well, yes, sometimes I do. I can't, admittedly, I can't always do it. If I'm counting eggs, I'm sticking my pinkies down into the shaving sometimes. And if I had gloves on, I wouldn't have the feel that I would have with a bare finger. So that same question could apply to some of the other birds. I talked about swallows last week. Swallows have a lot of feathers in the boxes, and I stick my little pinky in, parting the feathers, and I reach down into the nest, try to get a finger count by touching each of the eggs. Some people may be concerned, well, gee, you get oil on the eggs, but no, you'd have to coat that egg with oil in order to prevent oxygen from flowing through the eggshell and into the egg. So it's not a concern. I hope that answers the question. So here we have barn owls. On the left, we have the 2 barn owls in the palm tree that I talked about. And on the right here, that would be the female because of the darker coloring. She also has oftentimes has a darker face than the male. But we were talking about natural cavities, and gee, is this a natural cavity? No, it isn't. It's underneath a bridge that goes over Sacramento River. So some years ago, I was contacted by H.T. Harvey, a consultant firm, and they were working, they were doing an analysis for some retrofit work on this bridge. And underneath the bridge, they found these barn owls, a hen and owlets. And from here, it was an 80-foot drop down to the ground. So one misstep and you're laying splat on the ground. Now, H.T. Harvey, what they wanted to do is they wanted barn owl boxes. So I built 16 barn owl boxes for them, and they installed them below the bridge. And once they had evidence of habitation, and that could be pellets coughed up inside the boxes, then they netted off this area of the bridge so the owls couldn't get in. That would be at a time when these owls were gone, by the way. They netted that area off and the retrofit work could actually begin. But what this shows is a desperation for cavities. So on the left here, we have a beautiful female and the male. Now, they mate for life, supposedly, although the male may be a two-timer. And if a male doesn't have a female, if he's not mated yet, what he might do is he might drop prey into a cavity. So sometimes I find pocket gophers, one or two, laying inside a box, and that's a male trying to attract a female. If a female comes in, she sees the prey and she says, oh, this guy is a great provider. I'm going to be his mate. So on the left, we see a pair. Notice there's no eggs yet. But on the right here, now we have the female on eggs. And unless she gets up, I don't know how many eggs she has. So here I believe I see 3, but she probably has more than that. So I make a notation, well, if she's on an every other day schedule, this would be the date that she laid the first egg. So I come up with a first egg date. The male will stay in the box maybe 60% of his time because he doesn't want another male popping into the box. Males are territorial around the nest box. And on a couple occasions, I've had to actually remove dead owls. Someone got killed, be it the intruder or the original resident. So they can have 1 to 3 broods, 2 to 18 eggs. The most eggs I've ever had was 10. Frequency every 2 to 3 days, may even be 4 days. The more the female is being fed, the more often she lays eggs. Incubation period about 30 days. Nesting period up to 9 weeks. So in 9 weeks, typically a sledge. So you would have noticed the heart-shaped face on the owls, and what I want to point out is all of that is really feathers. Underneath all those feathers is a skull on her face. And what's unique about the skull is her ear cavities are offset. So what that supposedly causes is they either hear different frequencies in each of the ear, or it's timing of the sound waves that are different. The end result is that they can locate prey accurately. You could blindfold a barn owl and they can hunt. However, if you plug their ears and allowed them by sight, yes, they could still hunt, but they can't hunt as well. Now, I've been told by Steve Simmons, who I will mention later on, that barn owls can hear a mouse chewing on a grain of a seed. And they can also punch through six inches of earth. The pocket gophers will have his burrows, but they plug their burrows with dirt that they push out from the burrow. And barn owls can come down and not hear it and come down with shush forest. They'll punch through 6 inches of loose dirt. So here we have a barn owl hen with owlets, and they're young owlets. And what the hen typically does is she lays, well, what she always does is she lays her first egg. She begins incubating it immediately. She lays another egg. That egg is also incubated. So what we end up with is the eggs hatch on different schedules. And you saw in there were a few eggs that were still unhatched. The owlets are of different ages. So in reality, you could have an owlet that's maybe 2 weeks old and one that just hatched, and they're no bigger than the egg, and you don't want to be that little one. You don't want to be, if anybody is not going to make it, it's going to be the little egg, the little owlet. So here we have the owlets on the left. They're about 6 weeks old, the oldest. It's evident that they are of different ages. They actually form the facial disc at about 4 weeks. And it's cute how this little fella is hiding in the back here. But now they're just mostly white down. The adult feathers are coming in. Again, I typically just see the front of the owl. I'm not able to see anything other than what the camera shows. There would be no better indications of their age if you could see, for example, their wing feathers and their tail feathers coming out. But using the camera system that I have, you can't. Barn owls, there's not really much to them. I think barn owls they're all feathers and appetite. There's not much to them. Over here on the right, we have some beautiful juveniles. This one is probably in the 9-week range and would fledge, and it's a female. You can see the dark coloring on the breast here. But oftentimes there's one or two that become more defensive. They will get down into a defensive position and wings out, crouching down. Sometimes you will, in the videos, you'll hear a clacking sound. I think we're going to hear that later on. And the clacking sound isn't actually their bills clacking, but they're flicking their tongue. So we talked about the wood shavings make the nest boxes, the debris, cleaning out of the debris in the nest box easier. So what I have up here is a big chunk that I pulled out of a nest box, a big chunk of debris. And if the interior of the box gets wet enough, instead of everything being loose, it's kind of like a brick. So what I do is through the clean out door, I stick a flat nail puller in under the debris and prop it up and break it off. So way in this area here would have been the divider that's inside the nest box, and the entrance hole, the entrance portion of the box would have been over here. I break it off into 2 pieces. So I came back some weeks later after we had rain, and you began seeing all of the skulls, all of the bones from the prey that they've eaten in amongst the debris as it breaks down. So this is a picture of Steve Simmons, who came out to IBM Almaden Research Center to give a presentation. And he had been involved with numerous grad students. In one case, he had grad students that wanted to do a diet analysis. What do barn owls eat? So they cleaned out, I forget how many barn owls, and looked at everything, all of the skulls and whatever in the debris, and concluded that in total, in order to raise 5 owlets, the adults and the owlets would consume 68 pounds of prey. So the skulls that you see up here are the top 3 of the items that they found in the barn owl box. 42% pocket gophers, 30% voles, 17% deer mice. All of these skulls are those 3 species of rodents. So they have a ferocious appetite. Nature's killer of rodents. And this is Steve with one of his barn owl boxes. So I've got in contact with Steve in 2009. And by then I was already involved in monitoring barn owls, but we weren't having success. The success that I wanted, I had some boxes that were predated. Steve gave me his barn owl box design, and as far as I know, I've had no predation since using his design. Unfortunately, Steve passed away in June. He was a master bander. He ended up monitoring boxes, starting with wood duck boxes, for 48 years. He ended up fledging over 65,000 wood ducks, over 13,000 barn owls, and a number of other species. So we suffered a tremendous loss when we lost Steve. This is a video that I set up outside of a barn owl box at Cinnabar Hills Golf Club, and it's a motion activated infrared camera. And what I was hoping to do is to catch activity that goes on at night, and I wanted to see a barn owl fledge. So what we see here is the adults land on top of the box. They have prey in their feet, in their claws. They transfer it to their beaks, and then they jump up and fly in front of the box. And the owlets at this stage are old enough to peek out and grab the prey right from the adult. Prior to this time, before the hen leaves the box, the male would bring the prey into the box, drop it, and the female would break it up into pieces and feed the owlets. So they have some hungry kids there. I hope the video is coming across well. It's poor quality to begin with. So this is before dusk, and what we have is we have the juveniles returning, the juveniles who have already fledged returning to the box, because this is where the magic happens. This is where the adults feed them. And sticking his head out is another owlet that hasn't fledged yet. Now, get ready, here comes one. So it's amazing. They come out of the box, they've never flown before, and they can fly. So in this video here, we have three juveniles on top of the box. And what you might learn is never put a barn owl box outside of your bedroom window. Down below the barn owl box is a bluebird box mounted on the same post, and one of the owlets is roosting on top of the bluebird box. So once the owlets fledge, they hang around the box for about 4 weeks. So in those 4 weeks, the adults have to teach them how to hunt. And what we just saw there was one of the juveniles returning to the box. Maybe he was looking in the refrigerator to see if there's any food in there. Here's the second one wanting to get in. Now at this age, they don't have the flying skills that the adults do. So they have some effort, takes some effort to get back into the box. But the adults, if they want to get into the box, as we saw the adult land on top of the box, transfer prey to its beak, flip up in front of the box, hover briefly, reach out with its claws, grab the bottom of the entrance hole, and they will shoot themselves into the box. So they don't have any difficulty getting in and out. It's these juveniles that do. But in reality, for me, I find very few juveniles come back into the box. At the beginning of the video, we saw a juvenile fly in, and what he probably did is that near this box is a big oak tree, so he might have spent the day in the oak tree. Anyway, they have to learn from the adults how to hunt. What I saw in one of my videos is an adult fly past juveniles that were on top of the box, and one of the juveniles took off after the adult. And what I've read is the juvenile sees how an adult catches prey. It's burned into their memory and they know how to do it. So if they're not good hunters, they're not going to survive. Starvation is the #1 killer of barn owls. Oops, here we are at a break time. I'm almost an hour into this. So we're going to get into renesting, which is also called wild fostering, or the release of barn owls.
I'm really sorry, really quickly, before you continue, Erica asked, do you notice if many owl families die from rodenticides?
I can't say that I've personally experienced it, but I have seen postings. For example, there were 4 or 5 owlets in someone's pool in the Bay Area, and the cause was rodenticides. They got really, really thirsty, so they went to the pool, ended up drowning because they wanted to drink water. So it's not uncommon to find dead owlets in the box, but unless it's a number of owlets in the box, I wouldn't expect it to be rodenticides. For example, if there's 4 or 5 owlets in the box and they're all dead, well, maybe that's a case of where the adult brought in rodents that had the rodenticides in them. But it's not uncommon to find, a dead owlet. And I talked about the little feller. You don't want to be little Freddy, because little Freddy isn't going to make it. In the video, we saw the adult bringing food to the entrance hole, and the owlet right there snatching food away from the adult. The first owlet that's going to be at the entrance hole snatching food is going to be the oldest and the biggest. It's not going to be little Freddy. So little Freddy may get scraps that are left over. If all of the other owlets are not hungry anymore, then maybe he gets his chance. So anyway, I don't have any experiences that I could say that it was a rodenticide. A lot of my boxes are out in the middle of nowhere, so there would be no reason to have rodenticides in those areas.
We do have one more question from Teresa about barn owls, what kind or what size box and hole do they need?
This hole is an elliptic hole, and I forget the exact dimensions, but it might be 4 point something inches wide, 3 point something inches high. And it's an elliptical hole, and it's no bigger than a large hen can get in. So with nest boxes, you don't want entrance holes that are larger than the birds that you want inside the box. And we do have a barn owl box plan, which near the end I will reference again, and I actually have a QR code that you can scan. But on the Santa Clara Valley, I'm sorry, on the Silicon Valley Audubon Society's website, we do have a barn owl box plan. And it's not just a plan. We talk about, you know, where do you want to put the box? Should you put a box? Should you paint it? Should you not paint it? A lot of information related to barn owl boxes. So if anybody has a weak stomach and doesn't want to see a lot of sadness, you may want to bail out right now. All right, so I'll continue here. What we have is we have 6 owlets here that have been rescued, and that were taken to the Wildlife Center, Silicon Valley. And I have a good friend, Valerie Baldwin, who provides in-home care. So this is a picture of 6 owlets taken some years ago. Valerie provides in-home care, which means she feeds them, and then she calls me up and says, where can we put these? So when we do renesting, what we like to do, I love this picture of Valerie and this owlet here. So this is a owlet that we're about to renest. What we like to do is we like to take a rescued owlet and put it into a box that has similar aged owlets. We don't want it to be the oldest. We don't want it to be the youngest. We put it in the box, and the reason we want to renest it is because the adults are going to be better teachers at how to hunt, how to be an owl than humans. So if we can't renest, then Valerie has to feed the owl until it's old enough, make sure it gets exercise so it builds its strength and its wings, and try to teach it how to hunt, which just isn't going to be as successful as the barn owl adults doing it. Here we have a barn owl box, and initially we put the owlets through the top of the box, and this is what happens when we open up the box. See if I can play the video. So you can see there, they're hissing at us, they're somewhat upset, and you can also see that if I have this view of the owlets, let me go back. If I have that view of the owlets, I can see more than if I'm sticking a camera through the front of the box. So what happens if the owlets are too old, they actually start jumping at us. So of late, what we've been doing is running them through the entrance hole. But in both cases, what we do is we drop thawed out mice so they have something to eat. We put the mice in the box to kind of distract the occupants that are in the boxes, and then we inject the rescued owlet. And what we have here is a wonderful young woman, Lauren Williams. I had to take a picture of her without her mask so everybody gets to know what Lauren Williams looks like. Lauren is a graduate of Gavilan College and always willing to help. So this year we had 11 barn owl owlets that we wanted to renest. I call up Lauren and ask her if she would like to help me, and we're at IBM Research Center in Almaden Valley. Lauren is willing to do everything. Here she's carrying the ladder. Here she's, what we do is we plug the entrance hole. We have this plug, put it in the entrance hole so nobody can jump out. We set the ladder up, and Lauren has gone up to the box to look inside and make sure that everybody is okay. So over here we have Lauren going up the ladder.
Me.
Yeah.
We're going to push the owlet right through the entrance hole. At this point, we've already dropped some mice, thawed out mice, into the box to distract the owlets. How's that? Hey, looks good. So there we nested another owlet. And in this picture off the left here, once we not only feed them during the renesting, but I come back twice a week and drop mice into the box. And here we have 2 owlets in the box where I had dropped. One is already, the one on the left here is already swallowed one of the mice. And on the one on the right has it didn't speak. So here we have a box in which we inserted some owlets. Could have been 1 or 2, but I enjoy the reaction to all these owlets here. So you can hear the clicking noise. That's actually them flicking their tongue. And they're kind of looking, checking me out. I love their eyes. They're dark. I sometimes think they can see right into my soul. So everybody took that quite well. Here's a picture of Olive, and Olive admittedly is probably the worst condition I hope I ever see in an owlet. She had been rescued, and I showed this picture to my wife and I asked her, what should I name her? And Jana said Olive. So this is Olive right here. Olive came in and Valerie took care of her. She checked out okay, and here's Valerie when we're about to renest her. We put her into a box, and as I was feeding them mice, I noticed that Olive feathers weren't growing. She didn't look right. These other owlets in the back were supposed to be about her same age, but Olive isn't doing so well. So I took Olive out of the box, gave her back to Valerie, and look what happened. Valerie took care of her. Olive had some intestinal parasites and was put on antibiotics, and the antibiotics wasn't making any headway. Stool samples were being taken. They showed that the parasites were still there. So Valerie says, well, we're going to give her enough antibiotics. It's either going to kill her or cure her. So fortunately it cured her, and she turned into a beautiful bird. We do releases, and this is a more dramatic release than normal. I told Valerie that I'd like to get some video of the dramatic release. And this owl we had named Jumper. I had named him Jumper. And the reason we named him Jumper is we renested him in the box at Cinnabar Hills Golf Club. And the next day I checked on him, he was on the ground. Jumper had fallen out of a palm tree, and I think his siblings were dead, but he survived with a head injury. So there was some concern about the head injury. Anyway, Jumper jumped out of the box. Some golfers helped me put him back in the box, came back the next day, and he was on the ground. So I picked him up, took him back to Valerie, who provided in-home care, gave him the exercise he needed to fly, tried to train him to hunt as best she can. And here he's being released. That's the very box that we had renested him in. And we do the releases around dusk because we don't want crows, for example, some of the predators that are out in the daytime to be around. So we do the releases around dusk. And whatever happened to Jumper, we don't know. He disappeared. So what don't we want to see in the boxes? Well, I certainly don't want to see European starlings. Starling is really a fantastic bird if you look at the coloring, but they are a non-native bird. They were brought to the United States in the 1890s. 100 starlings were released in Central Park, all because he and others wanted to introduce into the United States all of the birds mentioned in the plays of William Shakespeare. So from those 100 starlings, we now have 200 million, more than 200 million starlings in the United States. And the problems with them is they are fierce competitors for nest cavities, often taking over the nests of native birds and expelling occupants. I don't get them in my smaller nest boxes, but I do get them in my kestrel boxes. And here's a picture of a nest. starling nest, and they make kind of a trashy nest, bringing in debris and feathers. Anyway, I never fledge any starlings. What I might do in this case here is either remove the eggs or simply plug the entrance holes so they can't get in to incubate the eggs. They can have 1 to 2 broods, 3 to 6 eggs, lay an egg every day. Incubation period rather short for a bird that size, 12 days, 21 to 23 days before they fledge. Now, I don't want to see this in one of my boxes either, and this is actually a bobcat on top of a barn owl box, and I don't think it was there to get the owlets which were in the box because I didn't see any scratches around the entrance hole. It was simply, it's a fantastic view. The box itself was already on a high hill in Cinnabar Hills Golf Club, and I was down below on a cart trail checking some boxes, and I happened to turn and look up, and I saw something on top of the box. I thought, well, maybe it's a turkey vulture. No, it isn't. It's some kind of a cat. Is it a bobcat? Is it a mountain lion? So I called the course's supervisor, told him to come over. He'll see something we've never seen. And he comes not on the cart path, but on a trail along the fence line, ran right past the front of this box, swung around, came down on the cart path to meet me, and I pointed back up the hill and said, "Did you see that?" And no, he hadn't. So we looked at it from down below, and he says, "Well, come on, let's go up there and see what it is." And I was a little hesitant because he's a runner and I'm not. And anyway, we jumped in his cart and we went up there, and the bobcat looked simply annoyed. It stayed up there all the while we were up there. I took a number of pictures of it. And then we left, and then from the distance, when I was checking another barn owl box, I looked back and saw the bobcat gone. But since then, I've put metal sheathing over the post, 4 feet of the sheathing right below the box, so hopefully the bobcat can't get a grip. It's mounted on a 4x6 cedar treated post. And in another box in Quicksilver Park, I had the acorn woodpecker take over the box. So I did calculation on the box and calculated over 4,000 acorns stored in the box, and they're boring holes into the box. So I finally gave up. I had actually 2 years in a row scraped all the acorns out, put wood shavings in, hoping to get barn owls, but I never did. All I got was the acorn woodpecker. So I let them have the box. They're storing the acorns. This is a great big granary for them. Okay, so now we get into problem solutions. What problems am I having? And as I mentioned before, these boxes are far apart, so the distance to and the height of the bounded boxes can make accessing the boxes difficult. So Steve Simmons, my good friend in Merced, had an ATV. He had a couple of ATVs, and he had ladder racks on the boxes. He had everything that he ever needed on that box except a Coke machine and a pool table. So Steve on the right shows a picture of him. He simply drives up near the box with the ATV, plugs the entrance hole, sets his ladder up and goes up and peeks in the box. He knew what was in the box, so his numbers were accurate. Now, the only time he didn't know what was accurate, he said that he determined that if he saw a reclining hen, all he did is roll her to see if she was on eggs. His earlier experience, he said that if he lifted her up to look at if she was on eggs, there was a 50% chance that she would abandon the eggs. So he rolled her. He would eventually know exactly how many eggs, exactly how many hatched, etc. So his numbers are accurate. He also, as I mentioned, was a master bander, and he knew who everybody was. So unless you're able to open the box, how do you peer inside the nest box? And this is me and using the camera system that I have. So I'm looking at my smartphone. On my smartphone, I see whatever the camera sees. And this is a variation of it. It's ready for a camera, and that camera could be either the pocket camera or a GoPro camera. GoPro cameras run hundreds of dollars, probably in the $300 range if you're going to buy a new one. Whereas the pocket cameras, you can get one for 150 maybe, a good one. So how do you get a ladder up to the box if you don't have an ATV? Well, this is me carrying a ladder and some of my supplies. Or you could find a couple of friends. This is Michelle Unger and her good friend Z, who came out one day to help me clean out the boxes. So they're carrying not only the ladder, but the supplies we need in order to clean out the boxes. So how do you get up to the box? You can be a glass ceiling breaker like Michelle. We set the ladder upside the box. We see the clean out door open here. Let me turn my laser on again. We see the clean out door open the top. Notice that she's wearing a face mask and gloves. When you're cleaning out Barnall boxes, you want to wear an N95 dust mask. Everybody knows nowadays what an N95 mask is. You want to wear gloves, you want to wear maybe even goggles, because the mice that the owls have eaten could have the hantavirus. So you don't want to get hantavirus. So use a lot of caution when you clean out the box. And on the right is me on a 14-foot ladder. I'm about to re-nest an owl. So what I'm trying to impress you with is, if you don't have an ATV, how the heck do you get the ladder to the box? And then how do you get up to the box? One thing you can do is bring the box to you.
Okay. Look at that.
So I came up with a pulley system that you can use to actually lower the box. And I would suggest that you would want to do this in boxes that are more isolated, because if you have a cable system, it could be more subject to vandalism. So here the box has been lowered. We just open it up and do our thing with the box. Then when it comes time to pull the box up, pull the cable, the box goes back up
We
again.
need to turn the box. Maybe you're going to need my help.
So what he's trying to do here is there's a little finger that sticks out from the top of the box. We have to put it through an eyelet. And the purpose of that is so that the box doesn't swing in the wind. Now, I only have one box that this system has been installed on. If you're going to put it, this is a 2-inch inside diameter steel pipe that the pulley system has been installed on. It slides up and down. The pulley system would probably run you $35 to $40. But if you buy in bulk, then you could get the price down again. So most of my large boxes are mounted on 2-inch diameter pipes, 12-foot long, some 3 feet into the ground, cemented in. So then another problem we have is, okay, we've re-nested the owlets, we dropped some mice into the box, now I need to do it again. I do it on an every 2-week schedule. What I came up with is what I call the gopher bomber. And basically it's, let me turn my laser on again here. Basically, it's a piece of PCV pipe and ABS plastic piping. One fits inside the other. This piece here is really a plunger. So when I have it down on the ground, I pull the plunger all the way out. In the other open end, I stick in the mice, and then I lift it up, stick it into the Barnall box, stick it into the box. And then I have a cord here that I pull, which pulls the plunger in and pushes the mice out. So that's how I'm able to feed the re-nested owlets twice a week. Here on the right, we have another young woman, very helpful, Maddie Kwan, who is doing it in a little bit taller box.
And Lee, how do you know if the owlets need supplemental food?
Well, if I peeked into the box and I saw mice prey laying in the box that I didn't drop in, then the adults are bringing it in. But that's sort of rare. If I drop mice into the box it is rare to see any of them left the next time I'm back to the box. So the fear here is that we've added another beak to be fed, and the adults are already stressed probably to feed not only themselves, but others. This particular box here had only one owlet. So the average number of owlets in a box is 5.6, and you don't want to be that 0.6, by the way. But there was only one owlet in the box, and what that means is they only had enough prey available. The hen either laid one egg or the other eggs disappeared, but I would normally see the eggs. If they didn't hatch, I would normally see them. So the adults are really stressed. The prey base wasn't so good. They only had one owlet, and here I'm feeding them to make sure that not only that owlet fledges, but the re-nested owlet also. And yes, I have seen video where I have a hen on eggs or a hen with owlets, and sometimes I see prey, and it's the male that's bringing the prey into the box. It's a wonderful sight to see.
Another anonymous question. The mice that you give them, are they alive?
No, they had been frozen. So the Wildlife Center gives them to Valerie, and Valerie gives them to me. So what other problem do I have? I have problems with northern flickers, the great big woodpecker, and what they've been doing is they've been working on some of my boxes. So plywood, sometimes one of the plies is missing underneath. And if you drum on that particular part of the box, it sounds different, it sounds hollow. So they will pick on that. And what I do is I've started using a product called Fix-It-All. And my test shows it as hard as the wood. And I even soaked a piece of wood that I had put some on, and even soaking in water 24 hours, it was hard as ever. So I'm hoping that instead of putting a piece of wood over this to patch the hole, I can patch it using this Fix-It-All. Steve Simmons says some of his wood duck boxes, he had patches on patches. He would patch his patches because the flickers are in there hammering on the boxes. So that's the second problem I have. And now I'd like to get into loss analysis. And again, if you have a weak stomach, this is maybe where you want to leave. So when I look at American kestrels here, what this chart shows, the yellow shows the number of boxes that I have. So I started out in 2010 with 6 boxes, and hey, it was fantastic. I had 37 eggs, 26 hatched, 24 fledged. Well, gee, I have to add more boxes. So I'm now up to 13 boxes. And what happened here? What happened in 2011 is I had 3 boxes that were poached, and I lost 14 chicks. Now, who would poach? Who would pull the chicks out of a nest box? My first thought was, geez, some falconer. And I talked to Valerie, who is a master falconer, and she says, no reputable falconer would do that. A falconer does not want to get chicks out of a box and then have to feed them and then teach them how to hunt. What he would prefer to do is set a trap out in the wild and catch an adult kestrel and use it as his bird, and then release it once he moves on to another bird. Kestrels, apparently, if I remember right, Valerie, kestrels are an easy bird to work with, an easy starter bird. So I don't know who poached those 11 chicks, but I have fear what happened to them. So kestrels actually do quite well. If you're a kestrel egg in my box, you have about a 70% chance of fledging. So this covers the years from 2010 through 2020, and I'm down to 19 boxes. When we look at barn owls, again, the data that I have on barn owls is the worst data I have. But if we look at this graph here, in 2017, I had 32 boxes. I had, the number here is the number of broods that I had. I had 33 broods. I'm sorry, 36 broods in 2017. Look at the number of eggs I had, 177 eggs, 133 hatched, 96 fledged. Very good year. Well, 2016 was sort of good, but what happened in 2015? I had 32 boxes and I only had 8 clutches. Here in 2018, I had 19 boxes. I only had 14 clutches. So what's the reason for the difference here? So what I'm going to do is look at these 4 years here to try to better understand what happened. If you look now, remember 2017 was the best year. 2016 was good, and the other 2 years not so good. Normal rainfall in San Jose, in this graph here, what it shows is rain through up to 2010. So it doesn't include the drought that we went through. But typically in the fall, we get September, October, November, December, increasing amounts of rain. January is a good rain. The most rain comes in February, and in March, it starts to taper off into June. I know that weather dramatically affects the success of barn owls, but my problem is how do I convey that? How do I analyze that? How can I show that? So if we look at 2015, we had rain in December. What happened in January? We didn't get any rain until February. Oh, here, I'm sorry, we had a little rain in January, and then we had some rain in February. So very, very sparse rainfall in 2015. 2016, it's looking better. We had some rain in December. The rains continue. Here we have frequent rain. The weather continues into March. Here we had a lot of rain in March, and then it tapers off. 2017 was the best year. So we had rain in December, good rain in February, good rain in January, and then it tapers off. Importantly here, notice that it tapers off. Okay, so this is 2018. 2018, we had no rain in February. Well, why is rain important? We have to get the rains to get the grasses growing. The rodents feed on the grasses, and they multiply when they're fed. So without the grasses, the rodents can't repopulate themselves. Prey base is down, and it affects the owls. Now here's a different situation in 2019. We had a lot of rain from December. It continued into January, continued into February, continued into March. And all of this rain here actually delays the barn owl, the start of the barn owl nesting season. Why does it delay the start of the barn owl nesting season? Because the rain affects their hunting ability. Barn owls hunt primarily by sound. If you're out there in a rainstorm, imagine trying to listen for a prey during the rain and the wind also. Barn owl feathers are not waterproof. If their feathers get wet, they could end up dying from hypothermia. So we had a lot of rain. Here we had a spurt of rain out in May also, which can cause another problem. If we look at just the winds for that period of time, this graph here attempts to show the wind run. So when did we have winds? And what I'm unable to show is what was the wind speed at night when the barn owls are hunting. I don't have that number. So we have wind runs here. And again, a wind run, what that means is if you threw a balloon up into the air, how far would it run? How far would it go? And anyway, it was windy during that time also. So the end result was that even though the hens were laying eggs, I had a lot of abandonment of eggs. So because the hen isn't being fed, she doesn't stay on the eggs, she abandons the eggs, she has to get out of the box to feed herself. So too much rain can cause problems, not enough rain can cause problems, too frequent the rain can cause problems, timing of the rain can cause problems. End result here is that during that period of time, I had 23 barn owl eggs that were abandoned. So too much rain affects the prey base, too little, too much. And too little rain, I mentioned that the grass doesn't grow, the rodents that feed on the grass can't feed. Too much rain causes another problem, because if you're a rodent living in the ground and your burrow gets flooded, you may end up drowning in the ground. I've actually seen cases where I walk past a burrow and water is just spewing out of it. So too much rain can cause a problem. The volume, frequency of the rain, I talked about the frequency of the rain. If we have rain storm that lasts 4 or 5 days in a row, the male may not be able to hunt during that period of time, which means the female isn't being fed, she leaves the box, etc. I've talked about the impact of rains on barn owls. The timing of storms can be a problem. And then there's also, on the other end of the scale, we don't have rains, but we have heat waves. So typically we start seeing high temperatures the end of May, June. We can have high temperatures, July, certainly high temperatures. But what happens is sometimes some of the owlets will jump out of the box. It's just simply too hot in the box. So doing things to keep the inside temperature of the box down can help, but doesn't ensure that the owlets are going to remain in the box. Once they jump out of the box, they will be on the ground as long as they can call the adults. As long as the adults find them, the adults will feed them. The problem is that the adults have to find them before the predators do. And if you would put a barn owl, an owlet, back in the box, it's already jumped. My experience is it will probably jump again. So I'm pretty well at the end of my talk. I want to mention Cornell, and they have a terrific website. They're all about birds. It gives you a fantastic amount of information on the various species of birds. They have these other projects going on here, and I participate in NestWatch, which means that I give them my data, and the data would include, for example, what date was the first egg laid, how many eggs were there, what clutch is this, what's the species of the bird, when did the eggs hatch, how many hatched, how many fledged, etc. So I give them all of that data, and they enter it into a database that researchers can use. On my website, I have plans for a bluebird nest box. The barn owl box plan that I mentioned is also available on my website, but it's also available on the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society's website. Both of these plans are. And then there's another, if you're into a group wanting to build small nest boxes, there's a plan on how to do it efficiently. Let me skip down here. I have a plan for my pole-mounted camera, so you can monitor large nest boxes. I also have a plan for my pulley system. So I think that's it. If you care to do any QR code scanning, this would be an opportunity to do it.
So you had talked about putting wood chips in your nest boxes or wood shavings. So we had someone ask if we should also put wood chips in other nest boxes for other species.
Well, the species that I talked about today are those that I put chips in: the wood ducks, the screech owls, the kestrels, and the barn owls. So those are the species that I put shavings into the boxes. Now, if you're getting into woodpeckers, I've actually tried it. Last week I mentioned that I had nut-owl woodpeckers in some of my standard boxes, the bluebird boxes. And I talked about the eggs keep disappearing. So for a while I started putting wood shavings in the bottom of the boxes. If I saw evidence that a nut-owl woodpecker had been in the box, I would put wood shavings in it, because that's what they normally do. They chip away at the interior of the cavity and the bottom of the cavity is covered with wood shavings. But that didn't seem to make any difference. The eggs kept disappearing, so it had no effect.
And Nick also wanted to know, where do you get your wood shavings?
Any pet store, it's Aspen wood shavings. I'm trying to think of Anyway, any pet store, there's a couple larger chains of stores, and I can't remember the name of them at the moment, Pet something. So they're used for other purposes like mice. People might have a pet mouse at home and use those kind of shavings in the box. The reason I like aspenwood shavings is they seem durable. You also have other shavings that might have a scent. I don't want to leave a scent of the shavings in the box. I like the durability of the aspenwood shavings.
Great. And we also had someone ask, will great horned owls use a nest box?
No, great horned owls do not nest in a nest box. They are an open nester.
Let's see, and then Teresa mentioned that the Hungry Owl Project is a nonprofit based in, it looks like Marin County or somewhere up north. If you are familiar with them, do you happen to know if they come this far south? Because they make and mount owl boxes often free of charge, working with high schools and things like that.
Yeah, I'm aware of them, but I've not actually had any contact with them. I do know that for a fee they will sell you a box and install it, but I've had no contact with them personally.
And then for the owls that you rescue, basically, Ursula wanted to know if you're ringing the owls before re-nesting them.
We don't, you're mentioning banding, is that ringing?
Yeah.
Okay, no, we're not banding them. Valerie nor I are banders. So basically, no, they're not being banded. We've thought about doing it, but when I talked to Steve Simmons, the master bander, again, on his projects, he banded everything. If you stood around Steve long enough, you'd find a band around your leg. So he knew everybody. He kept fantastic records of all of the banding he did. And I asked Steve, how many bands do you get returned? And he says 0.01%. So he doesn't get very many returned. If you find a large bird dead on the ground, it would be nice if you would look for a band. And if you find a band, there's the mechanism to return it. Steve mentioned having 2 bands returned, and basically the person who finds it fills out a form and sends the form in, and then Steve gets notified. Steve said that he had a barn owl that was found down in Los Angeles, and Steve said, well, it probably rode the front end of a truck all the way down to Los Angeles. Steve also had a band that was returned from an elementary school in Florida. And the elementary school students were dissecting a pellet. And in that pellet was a band from one of Steve's passerines. So the barn owl had eaten the passerine and had coughed up a pellet that had the band in it. So these are 2 cases that I know that Steve got bands returned. But in my situation, unless you can put a ladder up and get into the box and check the hen, for example, for a band, if you're into banding, that would be very useful. But you have to get up to the box. You'd have to get your hands on these birds in order to read the band number. Doing it my way, yeah, I may be able to see a band if the bird stands up, but I won't be able to read the band number. So banding for me and for Valerie, I guess, isn't important, although, gee, it would be nice. But if you're into banding, you're going to spend probably twice the amount of time that you do on a trail, because you have to go back and band everybody at an appropriate time. If there's owlets in a box, they have to be a certain age, maybe in the 12-day, 2-week range, before you can put a band on. Otherwise, the band would simply slip off their leg. Anyway, that was my thought on banding, and I hope that answers the question. I want to expand a little bit on the previous question, which I've already forgotten. Oh yes, I know what I wanted to say. Now, over the years, I've met a lot of people that say, gee, I want to put a barn owl box up in my backyard. It would be so wonderful to have barn owl boxes in my backyard. And me personally, if I thought it would work, I could have 10 of them up there. I would want to have 10 up there. I'd want them all to be used. But in reality, many people who want barn owl boxes, they simply don't have the right environment. They might be in a residential area. One person, for example, said, my wife wants to put up a barn owl box, and he sent me his mailing address, and I looked on Google Maps where it was, and it's right in the middle of a residential area. Yes, barn owls fly into residential areas to go into palm trees, but I told him the chances of getting a barn owl in his situation isn't too good. I give it a low probability. Some of these people want to put a barn owl box up and they're next to a freeway or near a freeway. Well, one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to put a barn owl box that's has a busy road, nighttime traffic on a busy road between the box and the owl's hunting area, because the owl is going to be crossing that busy road to and from its hunting area. Now, barn owls fly along at about an 8-foot height. They're kind of slow, like an old bomber chugging along. And they fly over cars, but then here comes a truck. So splat against the truck. Trucks and trains are the #2 killer of barn owls. Now with trains, it's the same way. If you have railroad tracks between the barn owl box and the hunting territory, they could fly over train tracks. They're over a bunch of flat cars. They can make it, but here comes a box car and they don't make it. So you really have to consider seriously where you're putting a barn owl box and evaluate its success. Now, this company might do that for you. I don't know. I don't really have any experience with them. The best habitat for barn owls is open grassland, or on the edge of open grassland, or they will hunt in open woodlands. But if you get into closed woodlands, no, they're not going to be in there. And that applies for falcons, for the kestrels, open grassland ideal. They take readily to nest boxes. The advantage of putting a barn owl box or a kestrel box out in open grassland is, hey, there's no trees there, there's no cavities there, but that's where all the prey is. So you can put it right in the middle of their prey, and they can have tremendous success. Kestrels are tolerant of humans and all the things they build. I personally know of an old house that had an opening in the attic, and kestrels were nesting in the attic, and people are coming and going out of that house all the time. So they're more accepting of human activity. Anyway, that's a little bit off subject, but I wanted to say that.
Yeah, those are great points. We do have several more questions about barn owl boxes, but before we get to those, first we had a comment. Looking at the pulleys, Sherry wondered if you are an engineer.
Well, no, but my dad always let us do everything he wanted in the shop. So we were hammering and sawing when we were little lads. But I am sort of good mechanically. My career with IBM, I started out fixing these mainframes and the equipment on the mainframes. And then I got into programming, and I ended up having seven different distinct job types within IBM. But I credit my success with being able to drive a nail without bending it to my dad and his permissiveness.
And Anne wanted to know if we can buy your boxes already made.
Gee, I had a breakfast meeting today, and I talked about having sold barn owl boxes in years past. And my price nowadays is $3,500 because I don't want to build any. But that doesn't help you get a nest box if you want. There are some nest boxes available on the web that I do recommend. And these boxes, design has is it's a top opening box. He was a master bander. He wanted to open the top. It also has a clean out door that you open and you push all the debris out. Well, even if you're not into banding, there are cases where you want to open the top and you want access to the interior. I mentioned that I had a couple of cases where adult owls had been killed in the box, and I had to get them out. So drag a ladder out to the box, open the top, and take the dead owl out. There are cases where I had a hen on eggs, and she was trying to incubate eggs that would never hatch. So she stayed in the box much too long. And the downside of that is that it's simply the male that was feeding her and the owlets because she's supposed to be out of the box. So in that case, I went out to the box, opened the top of the box, took the infertile eggs out, tossed them, closed the box, came back the next day, and she had left. She was now helping feed the owlets. So having the top door is nice under some circumstances, but many of the boxes that you see that you can buy don't have a top opening door. So my recommendation for those kind of boxes is make sure you have a large clean out door, because you're supposed to clean the box out once a year. A brood of owlets, 5 owlets, could add up to 3 inches of debris inside the box. If you don't clean the box out, the debris gets deeper and deeper and deeper. It doesn't really get deeper. They start pushing it up against the side, and what they end up with is a tunnel that goes through the debris. And the owlets don't have enough room to stand up if they're standing on all this debris. So you want a large clean out door without a top. When it comes clean out time, you're going to be pulling the debris into your face. So clean out is easier with a top door. But again, many of the boxes I don't think any of the boxes you buy have a top door. So Steve's design was rather unique. I mentioned he had fledged 12,000 barn owls, so we know it's a working design. But I can always recommend a box that comes as close to Steve's design as I could find. And there is one company, there's a couple of companies in the Bay Area that sell boxes.
And Anne actually clarified that she would like a bluebird box. So if you have any recommendations for that, that would be helpful too.
Well, if you're living in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley Audubon Society, you should be able to contact them and they will give you a box.
Great. Okay, so now we have several barn owl questions. The first is from Gina, who asks, do the barn owls return each year to the same box or trees? I have a family every year behind my house along Santa Teresa Golf Course.
Yes, I asked that very question of Steve Simmons, the master bander. Do barn owls return to the same box? And he says yes. They return to the same box or a nearby box. And that's true for kestrels also. Now, the interesting thing about barn owls is you think, gee, I had 5 owlets. I'm going to have 5 juveniles fledge. I'm going to have 5 more owls. What Steve said is that the barn owl owlets that fledglings, the juveniles, do not return to the same area. They go off to adjacent areas. And the barn owls that Steve finds back in his boxes are owls that nested previously in the box, or new owls from adjacent properties. So the important thing here is you're not necessarily going to grow your owl population by the juveniles that you're fledging because they're leaving the area. I asked Steve what's the oldest owl that he ever had, and he said that he banded a female, and female hen, and she came back for a couple of years in that same box. She disappeared for a few years, and then the remainder of the 10 years, she came back to that same box. So to answer your question, pretty much yes. And she was 10 years old when he last abandoned her. He said she had only one eye, so he doubted that she would last another year. Anyway, so 10 years, he had her maybe all but 2 or 3 out of those 10 years in that same box.
And Jill asked, if I have barn owls nesting in a large palm tree, would that be a good place for a box?
The difficulty you have with barn owls nesting in a particular place and you would like them to nest elsewhere, that is a problem, because if they're content nesting in a tree, the best you could do is put up a box nearby and somehow make that area inaccessible. Some years ago, I worked with PG&E, and part of their mitigation agreement was that they were going to set up some nest boxes nearby a new generating station. They had barn owls that were nesting up in the building, and the task was to get them to nest down in the barn owl boxes instead of nesting in the station. I don't know the outcome of that, but barn owl boxes were installed below. And similarly with the bridge incident that I talked about earlier, once they found evidence of habitation in the boxes that were put down below the bridge, they screened off the area that the owls had been nesting in. But I've never worked with anyone that's trying to get the barn owls out of palm trees.
And then an anonymous question is, at Lake Merritt this year, we had a barn owl couple set up a nest in a tree cavity for their first brood. However, they did not use the cavity again for their second brood. Should we try to clean the tree cavity out so that they can use it again? And what other reasons would make them abandon this perfect nest site?
Well, when you talk about abandon, I would need to ask, are there eggs in the box? Are there eggs in the cavity? Did they abandon the eggs? And the reason they might have abandoned the eggs is because there simply wasn't enough prey. If the female had been incubating the eggs and she wasn't being fed enough, she would leave. She would abandon the eggs. Another reason could be, if you don't see any eggs, are there a lot of pellets in there? And if they've been repeatedly using the cavity, there should be a lot of pellets in there. Are there any carcasses left over from owlets that might have died in the box? So even though the eggs hatch, the owlets grow, there's no assurance that if there isn't enough prey that they're going to get fed. Even though both adults might be trying to feed them, there simply isn't enough food. At Lake Merritt, what's the habitat? Is it open grassland? Is there a good hunting range? So that it's a number of questions related to that. And unless you see material spewing out of the cavity, some barn owl boxes, I've worked with barn owl boxes that have never been cleaned out. And what you'll see is debris below the cavity, below the entrance hole on the ground, because every time the owl exits the box, it drags some material with it. You look up at the entrance hole and you can see debris hanging out of the box. Some natural cavities are very deep. It may not be a problem. If the cavity isn't used consistently, it may not be a problem. If it's easy access, you could take a peek in there and see, what do you see? Do you see eggs? Do you see carcasses? Might give you a little more insight into what happened. But barn owls, again, don't always return. Cinnabar Hills Golf Club, for example, I have, I think 13 barn owl boxes now, and I only had 3 used this year, 13 out of 3, whereas previous years, all of them were used. And not only by barn owls, but sometimes they get used by kestrels. Now, one important thing I failed to mention is kestrels will use barn owl boxes. So if you have a situation where you're at a barn owl box checking it, and you see kestrels flying around, and there aren't barn owls in the box nesting already, what you should do is you should put a hole reducer on the hole, taking it down to 3 inches, 3-inch diameter hole, so that kestrels can get in and out of the box, but barn owls can't. The danger is if you don't do that, you could have a kestrel, for example, a female in there on eggs, and the barn owl pops in. The barn owl will kill the kestrel. So I should have mentioned that earlier. Unfortunately, I didn't think about it. But I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so there's some clarification. So the eggs were not abandoned from that first brood. She successfully fledged 4 owlets from it. And then their second brood was on the other side of the same tree, just higher up, and they successfully fledged 3 owlets from it. So they were just curious about if cleaning out the first nest cavity would have helped the barn owls.
Again, I would have to look in there and see how deep it is. The thing about barn owls and barn owl boxes is one consideration in the box is the distance between the bottom of the entrance hole and the floor. And take, for example, a barn owl box that has a big rectangular entrance hole, and the bottom of the entrance hole goes all the way down to the floor. What happens in those situations is, as you saw in the nighttime video, the owlets are waiting there at the entrance hole. You could have a smaller owlet waiting in front of older owlets at the entrance hole, and if the entrance hole is a large rectangular hole, the adult comes with food, and a larger owlet from behind lunges for the food and pushes the owlet out. So a good design nest box has a significant distance between the bottom of the entrance hole and the floor, so the owlets cannot be pushed out. The size of the entrance hole is such that a large hen can get in and nothing else. For example, a raccoon may be able to get its front end in, but it can't get its back end in. And then there's a partition on the inside that protects the owlets. They can go around the corner and hide behind the partition. So that particular hole, if you're talking about cleaning it out, if you look at it and you see the debris in the hole is level with the bottom of the entrance hole, you may want to clean it out and drop that down so owlets cannot be pushed out. Now, why they used one entrance hole over the other, I can't say. Sometimes rain, if it rains, storms come from a particular direction. What you want to do is you want to orient the box, the entrance hole of the box, away from the entrance or the direction the storms come, the prevalent direction of the storms, so that you don't get rain into the box. Well, if you're talking about a natural cavity, some of those natural cavities are sloped such that they kind of invite the rain more than others. The owlets get wet, they could die of hypothermia. Even the adults getting wet could die of hypothermia. So if you're able to, I would suggest, peek in there. Are there eggs? Are there carcasses? Is the debris at such a level that it constrains the size of the cavity? You would want a cavity that the owlets can stand up in. Anyway, again, I can't say why they would use one cavity over the other, because I have the same questions myself. Why did you use that barn owl box over there and not this one over here?
All right, I think that is the last question I'm seeing at this point. Again, thank you, Lee, so much for these great pair of presentations. So informative, and I think it'll be a really useful resource for so many people. And thank you also to everybody who attended and for all these great questions. So Lee, I wanted to ask you if you have anything you want to say to everybody before we all sign off.
Well, no, I want to thank everybody for sitting through this. I realize it was long, but I'm pleased that I could cover all of the material that I wanted to cover. And again, my presentation differs from other presentations because I'm showing what's inside the box. And in this case here, I talked about what's some of the downsides. How is nesting success affected? I wanted to get that in.